we wanted to let Ray have the opportunity. I'm going to actually hold a video camera while I do this and do two jobs at once, so be tolerant of that dual focus of mine. We wanted to give Ray an opportunity to talk a little bit about the play, maybe some of his inspiration or thought about that, and then we're open to questions from you folks who saw tonight's performance, and if you wanted to find anything out about sort of what was going on in that devilish little mind sitting in front of you right there, or big mind, I guess. We can go around that way. So I'll try and help moderate a little bit, and we'll see. So Ray, you want to start out and talk about anything in particular?
Sure. Well, I mean, there's nothing like coming across a good story. And about a year and a half ago, 2 years ago, I went to a lecture at the Penn Museum, and there was a woman there talking about not just Easter Island, but this woman, Katherine Routledge, who I had never heard about. And by the end of the lecture, it was about an hour and 15 minutes. And this is amazing. And it's just one of those things that you file away, you put it in the back of your head and say, you know, at some point I'm going to try to get in there and see if there's a story that could be dramatized. And decided, to give it a shot. Yes.
Have you been to Easter Island?
I have not.
Would you like to go?
Sure. Absolutely. Yeah.
I thought you did a really terrific job with establishing the attitudes of each of these characters, very distinct attitudes. Can you talk a little bit about developing that, since I don't know how much is written about her husband as opposed to her or whatever, just kind of the process you used to kind of develop who they were.
Sure, yeah, well, I mean, I think a lot of it, the work of the actors too. I mean, my goodness, these guys are so terrific. All three of them, sort of breathtaking to watch. But yeah, I mean, it's an interesting process because, you sort of do all this research and you've got all of this information and you've got these books and articles, and then, you have to still get in there and try to figure out what makes them tick and what can sort of drive them dramaturgically, scene after scene, and also in terms of their arc overall. And Catherine is troubled, and the marriage is a troubled one, and that seems certainly to have been true. Trouble that was exacerbated on the island. So a lot of it, is jagged. A lot of the writing is jagged. A lot of the transitions. I mean, I know that you guys have talked about it before. A lot of the transitions are jagged. So, it's a challenge to do that in such a way that it's also something that actors can work with, rather than say, what the hell is this guy up to? I guess it's trying to keep a balance. Clarity, but also, sort of rough in the way that they're rough.
Was it written with just three people in the play in mind, or was it scaled to meet this production?
Yeah, the more I started to think about it and work on it, the more, it became clear that the play kind of really wanted to be about these three people and what happens in terms of, the isolation. Certainly with Percy, he's on this island for 5 years, and, no one can really speak to him in his own language, and what starts to happen to someone like that. But also with these guys on a boat for a year, and, I found myself thinking about what isolation does, and bringing in other people, which I thought about and toyed with, and those scenes kind of ended up on the floor because it felt like something happened to the pressure cooker when you brought them in. And then, frankly, there's also the practical issue of where can you find Rapa Nui actors if you did want to, if you did want to bring them in. So I guess it's trying to tell the story that seems like wants to be told, and at the same time, sort of dealing with the practical exigency. So I guess both, to answer your question. Both things.
Were there natives on the island then, and they're not there now? I get the picture that there's no one there at all.
Oh, there were only about 250 Polynesian Rapa Nui people when they were there. There's actually a lot more now. Than there were then. As a matter of fact, a lot of people sort of feel like that island is sort of at its breaking point in terms of a population that can be sustained at this point.
Yeah, I thought it was a culture that just sort of disintegrated because they cut down all the trees. Is there any more to the mystery, solving the mystery of what happened to them?
Well, it's interesting, because it seems to me that Easter Island is one of those places that you sort of look at it and you see a reflection, and I think that that's been true for many generations now, starting maybe with these folks. You see through a kind of fractured mirror some aspect of, yourself, right? So I feel like, obviously that's one of the things that the play wants to explore, but in terms of continuity, there's a lot of scholarly writing these days about the degree to which, I'm not an expert on this, you have to talk to an anthropologist, but the degree to which the living civilization still maintains a kind of vital contact with the civilization that preceded it, or whether it even makes any sense to talk about two separate civilizations. And one of the things that Katherine really ended up sort of underlining in her work that came out of this was a kind of cultural continuity.
Ray, I'm really curious about the character of Percy, and how you developed him and what sort of, major themes that you saw as driving the character of Percy. Because there's some really interesting things there. There's this whole imperialistic and colonial sort of thing that's happening. He's very aware of it, but he's also very critical of it, but he takes advantage of it at the same time. I think one of the lines that sticking out for me is when Scoresby says you sneer at everybody except yourself, and he says you haven't been paying attention, and I think that's a very telling line. But in a lot of ways, it seems like, if anyone really turns a corner here, or if there's any sort of redemption that happens, it's with Percy. But at the same time, he's leaving, and the world's going to be blown to hell, and he thinks it should be blown to hell. So I don't know if you sort of have any thoughts on, or you could talk a little bit about some of the themes that you're working with.
Yeah, well, Percy, it was interesting because a lot is known about Katherine and Scoresby. There's a lot, relatively speaking, there's a lot of information about them. Next to nothing about Percy. We know he was there. He was doing what the character says he was doing. He was involved with a young Rapa Nui woman. So, all of those details. He was recalled. All of those details are from the record. But Percy allowed me, as the writer, this sort of fantastic freedom to sort of kind of bring him into a room and see what he wanted to do, I guess. Like have him start talking to these folks and just see what would happen. And it may be, that there's something redemptive, or it may be, something devilish. I'm going to leave these two. It could be a kind of wonderful gesture on his part, a kind of acknowledgement of something that he respects in her, but it could also be, wow, a sentence. Yeah, I'm going to let them eat each other up, and I'm going to just walk away. I don't know how, Adam, you feel about it.
I feel like when they, that moment where, what's going to happen to us? It's like, oh, good, we get to keep playing this game, because they should know if I'm leaving, of course I don't have any say in whether you stay or not. Let's make you sweat for it. And then, then leave you. Go out and take what I've learned and apply it to the business world. Yeah, some more on the devilish side.
I think that's certainly valid. Yeah.
King of a third world island. See how we can use that in the real world.
He never sent the letters. What gave you that idea?
Well, part of the attempt, in any case, is to create a kind of parallel. Dramaturgically, is to tell an interesting story, hopefully, but also to create a kind of parallel. That, these people are taking things that don't belong to them and trying to understand people better by so doing. And Percy is taking things that don't belong to him and trying to understand people by so doing and lying about it. Right. So in a sense, he's sort of watching them and doing what they're doing. And I think that there is something, for me, and Adam, this isn't prescriptive at all, of course, right? But I mean, there's something of he's very curious in a kind of clinical sense. Like, I wonder what would happen with these little rodents if I were to do this.
No, that's,
But it also reinforces the theme of isolation, because she's been assuming communication.
Which doesn't exist. Right.
It's a nice twist.
I know that frequently actors don't get to interact with a playwright during the preparation of a production. I was wondering if any of you could talk about just what it's like to be able to talk with the playwright while you're preparing for a role.
It's a great help, of course, because in any script that you pick up, there's always points here and there where you're not exactly sure what the intent is, and you have to wrestle with it, and you have to try different choices. Is this said in anger? Is this said sincerely? Is it said jokingly? And in this case, whenever we had some really huge questions, it was very easy to say, hey, Ray, what do you think about this? So it was a wonderful, wonderful process.
Yeah.
Something there's an
and
actor you
sometimes
don't
there'd be
obviate.
answers.
Yes, exactly.
Right.
Yeah, I would take Ray out to lunch with the, oh yeah, could you please help me run lines? But really, I would just be asking him questions the whole time. And sometimes he answered them, and sometimes he didn't. So.
Yes, that's the guilty as charged. Well, but because there are some things that are more important to discover than to know. I think. Correct.
Well, I think in flipping that question around a little bit, what did you discover, like once it gets up there with flesh and blood and emotion, and like you see it come off the page, what did you discover in the work?
Well,
that
yeah. Well, I mean, it's there are certain things that as rehearsals are moving forward that they don't work. Certain moments that don't work, and you'd hear about it from the actors. And sometimes you would say, oh well, what if you thought about this? And then the problem might clear up. But sometimes it didn't clear up because there was a problem with the writing. So you sometimes need the actors to sort of point out things that just. They sound great, at 3 o'clock in the morning. But then you put like living people behind them, and oh my goodness, yeah, that's a clunker. Or it just gets in the way of something they're trying to do. So yeah. I'm just amazed by the commitment. It's incredible to watch. You create something and you hand it to people, and the engagement, the commitment, the generosity, the caring that comes from the 3 actors is it's like the greatest feeling ever to hand it off.
Did you actually direct the play, or was there a different director?
John was one of the
Oh, he's the
directors.
director, I'm
John
sorry.
Doyle and Randall Wise
Yeah.
are the co-director.
Good job.
Yeah.
Ray, on one question about World War I. So there's this thing that happens in the background of the whole play, this business with the war outside and World War I, and you and I have talked about our interest in that war generally. But in the play, sort of, how do you see that fitting in? Like, why does that become important for them to be encountering that information, especially in reference to your idea about the isolation?
Well, we've met this civilization that tore itself to pieces, and oh my goodness, it's us, I guess, is sort of what I was thinking. There's this attempt at kind of a clinical distance, but as Katherine says, I mean, anything can happen, right? So something happened, and this phenomenally successful civilization fell apart. And somebody that no one had ever heard of shot an Austrian archduke, and then 4 years later, there's 20 million dead people. That we all have this idea that we're all so safe and everything is in such everything's secure, but I mean, it just takes 1 or 2 little things, and pretty soon, we're living in caves. So I think that's what I was thinking of.
Good. I want to get a positive note there as we're approaching the end. We'll talk back. That's how it's working towards. Any other questions or thoughts people have?
Yeah, I read in the dramaturgy that when Katherine returns home, that things don't go very well for her, and she's sort of institutional, not sort of, she is institutionalized for mental health. I thought that whole thematic strain in this play was neatly underscored there. Can you talk about that a little bit? What from her actual writings, did that ever come out in her writings? That conflict that she was having, that struggle that she was having with schizophrenia?
Do you want to answer?
No.
Well, it's great to read her writing because, I mean, her writing kind of contributed to a certain sound that I tried to get for Katherine, that she speaks a little differently than the other people. You know, she was able to kind of keep it together. The work, I think, was a great help for her. So they did publish jointly after she got back, but the decline became pretty precipitous, I would say, like after the war. Scoresby, you know, tried to look after her, but the marriage, I think, had already disintegrated at that point. You know, he was trying to take care of her as a, you know, not as a husband, but just as another human being. So the writing, you know, sounds pretty solid and very scientific, but it didn't take long for the final decline to set in.
Yeah, I didn't know, you know, her reaction with the statue, what is it, Moai?
The Moai. Well,
whether
yeah.
That you know, kind of exacerbated any symptoms.
Scoresby was convinced that the meeting with Angata was a terrible thing for her. He was convinced that Angata was just trying to screw with her head, and that she was never the same person after that. But whether that's true or not, I don't think we don't know. Yeah.
So the anything can happen thing. So as I understand it, they're paralleling the fate of Easter Island, where anything can and did happen. This woman's life, where anything could happen. She fell apart with World War I, where everything falls apart. So you see her as sort of like a microcosm of these other big events, and sort of her journey as being sort of similar to the journeys into who knows what's going to happen. Probably not really good things.
Yeah.
The fragility of life and civilization.
Right. No, I think that's really great. That's well put. Yeah.
Okay, folks. Well, I'm going to stand back up my camera. Why don't we give Ray one more round of applause? Thank you